It's a clash of titans at the World Blitz Championship. We have the legendary Peter Leko with the white pieces against the brilliant Boris Gelfand, and we are diving headfirst into a razor-sharp Sicilian Najdorf. Leko kicks things off with pawn to e4, and we get the classic Sicilian response, pawn to c5. The players rattle off the mainline moves, with white establishing a strong central presence, and Leko signals his aggressive intentions, going for the English attack setup with bishop to e3 and pawn to f3. Gelfand develops calmly, preparing to meet the coming storm in the center. White's queen slides to d2, connecting the rooks. Black prevents any kingside shenanigans with a timely pawn push to h5, and here it is. Peter Leko unleashes a stunning sacrifice. Knight slams into d5. What a move! This isn't just a free piece. Here's the brilliant point. If black takes with the bishop, white recaptures with the pawn. The bishop moves back to e7, and the knight hops to a5, creating a monster-passed pawn and crushing positional pressure. Gelfand thinks for a moment and accepts the challenge. He captures on d5 with his knight, and the battle is truly joined. And Leko's follow-up is perfect. Pawn takes the knight on d5, the only move that keeps the pressure on, creating a passed pawn and immediately threatening to win more material. But Gelfand finds an excellent reply. Bishop to f5 is the only move that keeps black in the game, challenging white's powerful center and developing a piece to a fantastic square. Both sides now get their kings to safety and complete their development. Leko begins to turn the screws on the queen side, pushing his knight to a5 and his pawn to c4, clamping down on black's position. The pressure mounts as white's pawn rolls forward to b4, continuing the queenside squeeze. Gelfand feels the heat and makes a small slip, allowing white to build an even stronger initiative. The better defensive path was a different idea entirely. The correct plan was rook to i8, then after rook to c1, the bishop could tuck back to d8. After a move like pawn to h3, the queen could slide to b8, shoring up the defenses. But in the game, Gelfand played bishop to g6, and this gives Leko the opening he was looking for. Leko plays with machine-like precision, centralizing his rooks, tucking the bishop back to f1, and repositioning the queen to f2. Every move improves the position and prepares for the final push. White's bishop lands on b6, creating an awkward pin on the d8 rook. In response, Gelfand lashes out in the center with a pawn push to e4. A quick trade occurs as white's bishop captures the rook on d8, and black immediately recaptures with his own bishop, simplifying things just a little. And here, Leko lets a bit of his advantage slip away with knight to b3. It's a slight inaccuracy. The engine much preferred rook to e1 to prepare for black's central counterplay. A huge moment. Gelfand misses the chance to punish white's slip and get back on even terms. He needed to strike in the center immediately. The much stronger move was pawn takes pawn on f3. After white recaptures, the knight can leap to e4. The queen moves to g2, and the knight jumps to g5, creating all sorts of problems and reaching a roughly equal game. But instead, black plays the quiet pawn to h3, and the golden opportunity is gone. Leko immediately seizes his chance, playing the correct rook to e1. Black's h-pawn is traded for the g-pawn, and white's bishop recaptures on g2. Now black finally captures on f3, opening the f-file for his rook. But Leko's recapture is absolutely perfect. Bishop takes the pawn on f3 is a fantastic move, keeping total control. And here's why it's so strong. If the queen comes to f5, the knight jumps to d4. Queen to g6 comes with check, but the king just sidesteps to h1, and white is simply winning a pawn. Leko now pushes his pawn to c5, creating a dangerous passed pawn. Gelfand's queen tries to create counterplay, hopping to h3 and then h6, but white's queen on g3 keeps everything under control. Leko pushes his pawn to c6, a strong move, but he actually missed a cleaner, more decisive kill. The absolute best move was queen takes the pawn on d6. After knight to h7, the bishop simply drops back to g2. If bishop to h4, queen to e5 wins a pawn cleanly and simplifies into a winning endgame. But in the game, Leko went for pawn to c6, keeping the game complex. The pawns are exchanged on c6, leaving white with a powerful passed pawn. The pieces now dance around the board, with both sides fighting for control of the key lines, and this is a decisive error from Gelfand. Pushing the pawn to d5 looks active, but it opens the floodgates for a crushing white attack. He needed to stay solid with bishop to f5. After queen to f2, bishop to e6 holds everything together. Then, after pawn to h3, only then can the d5 push be considered. Instead, after the immediate pawn break, the pawn rushes forward to d5, and that's all the invitation Leko needs. Leko finds the perfect response. Queen to h3 is a brilliant shot that punishes black's last move instantly. The point is devastating. If black tries bishop to b6 check, the king calmly steps to h1. Now queen takes the queen on h3, and after bishop recaptures, white is heading for a completely winning endgame, and that's the final mistake. Rook to b8 seals black's fate, missing one last tricky resource to stay in the fight. Bishop to b6. Check king to h1, queen takes queen on h3, bishop takes queen on h3, bishop to e4, check. But in the game, Gelfand plays rook to b8, and after this, the position is completely lost. The queens are traded off on h6, and white emerges with a technically winning endgame, boasting a passed pawn and far more active pieces. Leko plays pawn to a3. In the heat of blitz, even in a winning position, a small inaccuracy slips in, but it doesn't change the outcome. Black's knight hops to g4, but this isn't the most stubborn defense. The d-pawn push offered more resistance. White plays pawn to h3. It's a good move, but taking the pawn on d5 immediately would have been even stronger. The pressure of the clock is clearly a factor, as Gelfand's knight moves to e5, another suboptimal choice. The most resilient defense was again bishop to b6 check. After knight to c5, the knight could retreat to f6. Then, after rook to d1, rook to e8 holds on for a while longer. But after the move played, the knight lands on e5, and white's advantage grows. White's bishop snaps off the pawn on d5. This is perfectly good, but the engine points to an even more precise rook move that would have won a piece on the spot. Now we see the final conversion. White's pieces coordinate perfectly, with the bishop pair slicing across the board and the knight preparing to invade on c5, completely shutting black down. Black's king steps to f7, an unfortunate move that allows a decisive tactical shot. The tougher defense was to play rook to d2. Even after knight takes a6, bishop to b6 check forces the knight back to c5, and the knight can reroute to d3. But after the king move, the king shifts to f7, and white's knight is ready to pounce. The white knight leaps in and captures the pawn on a6. Gelfand throws in one last desperate check with his bishop to b6. Leko's king calmly steps to h2. It's a tiny slip in a completely won position, but the result is not in doubt. Black's rook moves to d2, but in a hopeless position, the moves don't matter much anymore. This isn't the best, but nothing could save the game, and that is the final nail in the coffin. The rook takes the knight on e5, winning a piece cleanly and leaving black's position in absolute ruins. And with that, Boris Gelfand resigns. Peter Leko wins a beautifully played game. It was a masterpiece of attacking chess, all stemming from that brilliant knight sacrifice on move 19. Gelfand resigned because he is simply down a full rook with no counterplay, and he saw this hopeless continuation. If the bishop moves to d4, the rook simply slides to d5. Now, if bishop takes the rook on c3, the pawn pushes to c7, and there's no way to stop it from becoming a queen.